I'm Elena, 29 years old, and if you asked me about my biggest regret, it would be trusting too easily. I once dreamed of becoming a photographer, capturing moments that would make people pause and feel something deep. But life had other plans. After college, I found myself working as a loan processor at a credit union in Charleston, South Carolina. The job paid the bills and helped chip away at my student debt, even if it wasn't what I'd imagined for myself. I met David at my friend's housewarming party. He was her cousin, and we ended up paired together for charades. His laugh was infectious, his stories captivating, and most importantly, he seemed to understand the creative dreams I'd shelved. Turns out David had once been passionate about music, playing guitar in coffee shops throughout college before switching to accounting to meet his family's expectations. Before we continue with today's story, if you're enjoying what you've heard so far, please hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber helps me keep sharing these inspiring tales that touch your day. Thank you for your support. We started seeing each other just days after that party. My mother constantly hinted about when I'd finally give her a son-in-law and grandchildren to spoil. Though I wasn't completely ready for marriage, I found myself softening to the idea. David was attentive at first. Weekend getaways, thoughtful surprises like a vintage camera, because he knew I still loved taking photos during my walks. Everything felt magical. A year later, we married, and I decided to leave my position at the credit union to focus on building our future together. David worked for an accounting firm in Colombia, earned good money, and insisted I deserved time to breathe after years of grinding through work and school. But shortly after our wedding, I began learning more about his family dynamics. David had a younger brother named Marcus, who was 2 years our junior. His family explained that Marcus had been in a devastating car accident at 19. Since then, they said, he'd been unable to speak or walk properly. At first, my heart broke for him. A young man confined to a wheelchair and in silence seemed like such a tragedy. But strangely, Marcus didn't appear as devastated as I'd expected. Though he couldn't speak, he communicated through writing and gestures. I was hesitant initially, but I learned to understand Marcus through his expressions, his knowing smiles, and his gentle movements. I remember sitting with Marcus on the back deck one evening. I pointed to the sunset and traced the outline of a camera in the air. Marcus grinned and drew a thumbs up. I laughed and gestured back. You get it, don't you? He nodded, his eyes twinkling like we'd just shared a private joke. If Marcus was a quiet beacon of understanding, then my mother-in-law, Patricia, was a brewing thunderstorm. She scrutinized me with calculating eyes, as if I were merchandise still eligible for return. Every visit to their house felt like walking into a pop quiz I hadn't studied for. Don't leave David's jacket crumpled like that, she'd snap with disapproval. A man's appearance reflects on his wife's character. I'd smile tightly and quickly hang the jacket properly. Everything in their house had its precise place. Dishes arranged by size, magazines stacked at perfect angles. I understood organization, but Patricia's version always made me feel inadequate. To her, David was still her little boy, and I, despite being legally his wife, remained an intruder in their circle. After the wedding, we lived in a cozy townhouse about 15 minutes from David's parents. Somehow, Patricia always knew exactly when I was home alone. She'd call or, worse, arrive unannounced, carrying grocery bags and a list of suggestions, as if I were a new employee needing supervision. I once thought marriage meant creating a peaceful sanctuary. Instead, I'd entered a family with invisible rules where every action was judged to please the matriarch, and my efforts were treated as basic obligations. I never could have predicted that Marcus, the one everyone saw as broken and voiceless, would become the person who shattered everything I thought I knew. I can't pinpoint exactly when things started changing. Maybe it was several months after our first anniversary when David stopped smiling when I brought him his morning coffee, or when he stopped texting to check if I'd eaten lunch. The small gestures that once made me feel cherished slowly vanished. David began working late more frequently, claiming urgent deadlines or saying his supervisor needed him to review important files. On those nights, I'd eat dinner alone, staring at my cooling plate and telling myself he was just busy with his career. But gradually, the distance between us became undeniable. When I asked questions, he deflected. When I stayed quiet, he didn't reach out. As David grew more distant, I found myself spending more time with Marcus. I visited him regularly, and although Patricia initially disapproved, I didn't care anymore. Each time I arrived, Marcus would be waiting by the window, his notebook ready. He'd write little messages about the weather, draw sketches of birds he'd seen in the yard, or share observations about the neighbors. In his words, I discovered his spirit was vibrant, intelligent, and far more perceptive than anyone in the family gave him credit for. I started learning basic sign language during evenings when David was working late or buried in his laptop. Initially, I only mastered simple signs like hello and thank you. But soon, I understood more. It wasn't just communication. It was a connection between Marcus and me. Whenever we talked with our hands, it felt like we were escaping a harsh world where Patricia's cutting remarks still echoed in my mind. "I don't understand what David sees in someone like you," Patricia said one afternoon when I'd just helped Marcus organize his art supplies. "Marcus might enjoy your company, but that doesn't mean I have to." I didn't respond, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew with Patricia, silence was my strongest defense. Every word she spoke felt like criticism wrapped in false concern. And David? He neither defended me nor challenged his mother. Whenever I mentioned her harsh comments, he would shrug and say, "That's just Mom's way. You'll get used to it." Eventually, I stopped telling him, and he stopped asking. One crisp October evening, with leaves just beginning to turn amber, I went to David's parents' house with a batch of homemade apple cinnamon muffins. Marcus loved them, and I wanted to surprise him. But as I walked inside, I saw David sitting in the living room with his mother, both laughing about something I hadn't seen him find amusing around me in months. "You're here tonight?" David asked, not sounding pleased at all. "I baked these for Marcus," I replied gently, setting the container on the counter. "You didn't mention you'd be visiting." "Family doesn't need to announce visits," Patricia cut in, her eyes cold. "We can drop by whenever we want." It sounded welcoming, but I knew it wasn't meant for me. I walked over to Marcus. He was sitting by the window as usual, but this time without his notebook, just holding a green cushion tightly. He looked at me, blinking slowly as if asking, "Are you all right?" I forced a smile and signed, "I'm okay." But in that moment, I realized my hands were shaking. That night, when we returned home, David barely spoke. I hung up my coat, then turned to him and asked, "Is there something you're not telling me?" He tensed. "What kind of question is that?" "I don't know. I just feel like you're not really present anymore." "Not completely." He sighed, staring at the floor before saying, "It's just work stress. Don't read too much into it." There it was again. "Don't read too much into it." I said nothing more. But I knew my instincts weren't wrong. Something was happening in this family, and I, once someone he treasured, now felt like a stranger in my own marriage. Marcus was the only light remaining. But what I didn't know yet was that his light would be the one to illuminate all the secrets David and his family had been hiding for so long. About 2 weeks later, on a peaceful Saturday morning, I was preparing breakfast when David entered the kitchen looking uncomfortable. He set his phone down on the counter and gave me a wary look, like he was about to deliver difficult news. "Elena, do you have any plans for next weekend?" he asked with a hesitant tone. I stopped what I was doing and faced him. Lately, David has rarely asked about my schedule. My pulse quickened. "I don't have anything planned." "Why?" David hesitated before continuing. "My family decided to take a trip to the mountains. My parents and I. A long weekend getaway." I was surprised and, for a moment, even excited. The mountains? Wasn't that where we'd once talked about going for our second anniversary? But that brief excitement faded when I saw David's expression. He didn't look like he intended to include me. "What about me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though the sting of exclusion had already begun. David stared at the counter, avoiding my eyes. "Elena, this time it's just immediate family. Actually, there's something I need to ask you." A wave of dread washed over me. I took a deep breath to steady myself. "What is it?" He paused, then said, "My family would like you to stay home and look after Marcus while we're gone." I froze, disappointment crashing through me. I had sensed the growing distance lately, but I never imagined David would exclude me this blatantly. "Look after Marcus," I repeated, disbelief clear in my voice. "Why not bring him along?" David sighed. "Mom says it would be too challenging for Marcus to travel that far. Plus, she thinks you're the best person to care for him. You two have a good relationship, right?" He said that last part carefully, as if trying to corner me, making it impossible to refuse without seeming heartless. Right then, the doorbell chimed. I hadn't even moved when David quickly went to answer it. A moment later, Patricia walked in, wearing her usual stern expression. "I'm sure David already explained everything to you, Elena," she said, her sharp gaze fixed on me. I stood there in my kitchen, feeling a suffocating weight I couldn't shake. David remained silent beside her. "Do you have any problems with this arrangement?" she continued, her tone daring me to object. I was furious inside, but I chose not to show it. Instead, I gave a slight smile and replied softly, masking the deep hurt rising within me. "No, of course not. I'd be happy to take care of Marcus." Patricia nodded, clearly satisfied. "Good. We can enjoy our trip knowing Marcus will be well looked after." David turned away, obviously avoiding my gaze. After his mother left to wait in the car, he came closer and whispered, "I'm sorry, Elena. I didn't want to put you in this position, but everything's already been arranged." I looked up at him, hiding my emotions, and said quietly, "Sounds like you made your decision before asking me, didn't you?" David went quiet for a moment, then said under his breath, "I didn't have a choice." He walked out quickly, leaving me standing in the kitchen, surrounded by silence. I had done everything possible to please this family, and this was my reward. Indifference and decisions made without consulting me. And yet, in that moment, I realized something. At least I wouldn't have to endure Patricia's criticism for the next few days. That afternoon, I went to David's parents' house to see Marcus. He was sitting by the window, his face lighting up as soon as he saw me enter. I sat down beside him and signed gently, "I'm going to stay here with you for a few days. Is that okay?" Marcus looked up suddenly, his bright eyes blinking as he signed back, "They left you behind again." I was startled. It was the first time he'd used that phrase. But I nodded, not hiding the truth anymore. "Yes, they went to the mountains." Marcus stared at me for a moment, then signed something that stopped me cold. "They're not going to the mountains." I stared at him in disbelief. He just smiled, his eyes carrying a mysterious glint I'd never seen before. And that's when I realized maybe Marcus was the one who truly understood the secrets this family had been hiding. What he was about to reveal would show me that being left behind this time might actually be the opportunity one never saw coming. The next morning, I opened the living room blinds at my in-laws' house. Soft autumn sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the space. The house was unusually quiet. David's family had left for their supposed mountain retreat early that morning. No more Patricia's complaints. No more judgmental looks over how I folded the towels incorrectly. I made a cup of tea and brought it into Marcus's room like I always did. He was lying on his side, gazing out the window at the oak tree his father had planted years ago. I knocked softly and entered. "I brought tea. The chamomile blend you like." Marcus slowly turned his head, and what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about this family. He pushed himself up to a sitting position with complete control. I froze in place, eyes wide. It felt like all sound had been sucked from the room. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might be hallucinating. "What are you doing?" I stammered, unable to hide my shock. Marcus let out a soft laugh, then spoke clearly. His voice was warm yet determined. "Relax. Don't panic." I almost dropped the teacup. "Marcus, you can talk. You can move normally." He swung his legs over the side of the bed, standing up with perfect balance. No trembling, no hesitation, completely steady. "I never lost the ability to walk or talk," he said calmly. "It was all a performance, one I had to maintain for years to protect myself." I couldn't speak. Memories flooded back, pushing Marcus's wheelchair, comforting him after Patricia's scolding. Had all of it been fake? Why? I finally asked. "Why would you do that?" Marcus sat down in a chair and gestured for me to sit too. Then he began to speak, his voice clear and steady. "I'm David's half-brother. His father had me with his first wife. Patricia never saw me as part of the family. After my dad died, she gained complete control. I was a burden she had to tolerate." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "When I had that car accident at 19, I was hurt, but not as badly as they claimed. Patricia saw an opportunity. She told everyone I had severe brain trauma. When I recovered enough to understand what was happening, I chose to stay silent. I realized that the more helpless I appeared, the less attention they paid to me, and the less attention meant more freedom." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "You've been pretending all these years?" "Not forever. Just since I realized that weakness was my invisibility cloak. They stopped seeing me as a threat or even a person." He smiled sadly. You were the only one who saw me as human, not a responsibility or a burden." I sat there stunned. The pieces started falling into place. I remembered his knowing looks every time Patricia lashed out at me. The quiet smiles, the subtle understanding. All along, Marcus had been watching, waiting, learning. "But why now?" I asked. "Why tell me this now?" Marcus stood up, walked to his closet, and pulled out a laptop and a thick folder. "Because we need to talk about what David and Patricia are really doing," he said, his voice unusually serious. "And you need to see the truth about your husband." My jaw dropped. "What kind of truth?" He opened the laptop and showed me a screen filled with financial records, bank statements, and what looked like legal documents. "Patricia isn't just controlling Elena. She's been embezzling money from the family trust my father left. David knows about it, and he's been helping her cover it up." I shook my head, still in shock. "That's impossible. David works in accounting. He would never." "Elena," Marcus interrupted gently. "David's been stealing from his own clients, too. Small amounts, nothing that would be noticed immediately. But over time, it adds up." He showed me printed emails, bank transfers, and recorded phone conversations. I've been documenting everything for months. Every conversation, every transaction. They think I can't understand what they're talking about when they discuss their plans right in front of me. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. "Plans for what?" Marcus's expression grew darker. "They're planning to disappear Elena. They've been moving money offshore, setting up new identities. The mountain trip? It's not a vacation. It's the beginning of their escape. My mind raced. But what about me? What about us? You were never part of their plan, Marcus said softly. They were going to leave you behind, let you take the blame for David's missing client funds. Patricia convinced David that you'd be the perfect scapegoat, the grieving wife who knew nothing about her husband's crimes. I stood up abruptly, pacing the room. This can't be real. David wouldn't do this to me. Marcus opened the folder and showed me more documents. Look at this. They've been planning this for over a year. Ever since David started having financial troubles at work. He pointed to a handwritten note in Patricia's writing. Elena knows nothing. She'll be devastated but clean. Perfect cover. I felt sick. Everything I'd attributed to work stress, to growing apart, to normal marriage struggles, it had all been calculated deception. There's more, Marcus said quietly. They're not just stealing money. Patricia's been slowly poisoning my father before he died. She wanted to make sure she inherited everything. I stared at him in horror. Marcus, that's murder. He nodded grimly. I have evidence. Medical records, receipts for chemicals she bought, and recordings of her talking to David about it. She thought I couldn't understand what they were discussing. I sank back into the chair, overwhelmed. Why are you telling me this? Why risk exposing yourself? Marcus looked out the window, then back at me. Because you're the only person in this family who ever treated me like I mattered. And because they're planning to frame you for all of this. I couldn't let that happen. I looked into his eyes, no longer seeing the helpless young man I'd thought I knew. Standing before me was someone who had survived years of abuse and neglect by becoming invisible, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to act. What do we do? I asked. Marcus smiled for the first time since this conversation began. We make sure they face justice. And we make sure you're protected. He handed me a phone. I've already contacted the FBI. They're very interested in financial crimes and murder. An agent named Sarah Chin will be here in 2 hours. I took the phone with shaking hands. Marcus, if they find out you can walk and talk. They won't get the chance, he said firmly. By the time they realize what's happening, they'll be in custody. I looked at him with new respect and gratitude. You've been protecting me this whole time, haven't you? Marcus nodded. Someone had to, and now it's time to make sure they can never hurt anyone again. As we waited for the FBI agent to arrive, I realized that being left behind this time wasn't abandonment, it was salvation. Marcus had used his invisibility to become the most powerful person in the room, and now he was using that power to save us both. 2 hours later, Agent Sarah Chin arrived with a team of investigators. Marcus had prepared everything meticulously: documents, recordings, digital evidence, and witness statements he'd been collecting for months. As they built their case, I learned the full scope of David and Patricia's crimes. They had stolen over $2 million from various sources, planned to fake their deaths in a mountain climbing accident, and start new lives in South America. But they hadn't counted on Marcus being their silent witness to everything. 3 days later, David and Patricia were arrested at the airport, attempting to board a flight to Argentina with fake passports and a suitcase full of cash. The investigation revealed even more than Marcus had uncovered. Patricia had indeed been slowly poisoning her husband, and David had been embezzling from his clients for over 2 years. During the trial, Marcus testified in person, stunning everyone who had known him as the silent, disabled brother. His testimony was clear, detailed, and devastating. David was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Patricia received 25 years for murder and embezzlement. As for me, I was cleared of all suspicion and received full protection under the Witness Protection Program until the trials were complete. 6 months after the arrests, I was sitting in my new apartment in Asheville, North Carolina, where Marcus had also decided to relocate. We'd both needed fresh starts, far from the family that had deceived us both. Marcus was taking classes at the local community college, studying computer forensics. He discovered he had a talent for uncovering digital crimes. I had returned to photography, this time as a freelance photojournalist specializing in investigative pieces. My first major assignment was documenting financial crimes in small communities, a subject I now understood all too well. One evening, as we were having dinner on my balcony overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains, Marcus looked at me and smiled. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Finding out the truth?" I considered his question carefully. "No," I said finally. "The truth hurt, but living a lie would have destroyed me eventually." Marcus nodded. "I spent so many years invisible, watching everyone else live their lives. Now, I finally get to live mine." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me. For protecting me. For showing me that sometimes the person who appears weakest is actually the strongest." Marcus raised his glass of iced tea. "Here's to new beginnings." I clinked my glass against his. "And to never underestimate the quiet ones." As darkness fell over the mountains, I realized that sometimes betrayal isn't just about what people do to you. It's about discovering who they really are beneath the masks they wear. David and Patricia had seen Marcus as invisible and me as expendable. But in the end, the person they'd ignored became the one who exposed their crimes, and the woman they'd planned to sacrifice became the witness who helped put them away. Not all endings are perfect, but some endings are exactly what we need. And for me, this wasn't just the end of a marriage built on lies. It was the beginning of a life built on truth. I learned that sometimes strength isn't about holding on to relationships that harm us. It's about having the courage to face reality and choose our own path forward. Life doesn't end when people betray you. It truly begins when you decide to stop accepting less than you deserve.